The night was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, like the world is holding its breath. In a small house on the edge of town, the Johnson family slept peacefully, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. They were a family of 4: John, the father, Mary, the mother, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Michael. They were ordinary people, living an ordinary life. But that night, their lives would end in the most brutal way imaginable. Stay with us until the end of this video, where we will reveal if our previous story, the terrifying story of Japan's suicide forest, is true or not. It was 2:17 a.m. when the first sound broke the silence. A faint creak, like a floorboard bending under the weight of a foot. Then another, and another. The sound was coming from the living room. If anyone had been awake, they might have heard it. But they were all deep in sleep, their dreams undisturbed. The intruder moved slowly, carefully. He had been watching the house for weeks, learning their routines, their habits. He knew where they slept, where they kept their valuables, and most importantly, he knew they had no security system. The house was an easy target. But tonight, he wasn't there to steal. He was there for something much darker. The first door he reached was Emily's. He pushed it open, the hinges squeaking softly. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight, casting long shadows on the walls. Emily lay in her bed, her breathing slow and steady. The intruder stood over her for a moment, watching. Then, without warning, he raised the knife and brought it down. The sound was muffled, but it was enough to wake John. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. "Mary," he whispered, shaking his wife awake. "Did you hear that?" Mary blinked, confused. "Hear what?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. Before John could answer, the bedroom door flew open. The intruder stood in the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. In his hand, the knife gleamed in the moonlight. John jumped out of bed, his mind racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The intruder didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, the knife slicing through the air. John fought back, but he was no match for the intruder's strength. The knife found its mark again and again until John collapsed to the floor, his blood pooling around him. Mary screamed, but the sound was cut short as the intruder turned on her. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The knife struck her in the back, then the neck, and she fell beside her husband. The intruder stood over their bodies, breathing heavily. He wiped the blood from the knife on the bedsheet, then turned and walked out of the room. He still had one more target. Michael's room was next. The boy was asleep, his face peaceful, unaware of the nightmare that had just unfolded. The intruder hesitated for a moment, the knife trembling in his hand. But then he remembered why he was there, why he had come. He raised the knife and brought it down. By the time the sun rose, the house was silent once more. The bodies of the Johnson family lay where they had fallen, their blood staining the floors and walls. The intruder was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his presence. A single footprint in the blood, leading out the door and into the night. The police arrived hours later, called by a neighbor who had noticed the silence. They found the bodies, the blood, and the knife, still lying on the floor of Michael's room. But the intruder was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, leaving no clues, no trail to follow. The town was in shock. How could something like this happen here? In their quiet, peaceful community? The police worked tirelessly, but the case went cold. The killer was never caught, and the Johnson family was laid to rest in a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. But the story didn't end there. Years later, a man was arrested in another state for a similar crime. When questioned, he confessed to the murders of the Johnson family. He told the police everything, how he had watched them, how he had planned the attack, how he had killed them one by one. But when asked why, he simply shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "I just felt like it." The town never recovered from the tragedy. The house where the Johnson family had lived stood empty for years, a grim reminder of what had happened there. Eventually, it was torn down, and a new house was built in its place. But the memories remained, haunting the town like a ghost. And every now and then, on a quiet night, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the faint sound of a floorboard creaking, as if the intruder is still there, moving through the shadows, waiting for his next victim. The investigation into the Johnson family murders revealed chilling details about the killer's methods. He had entered the house through a back window, which he had pried open with a crowbar. The window was small, but he was a thin man, and he slipped through easily. Once inside, he moved with precision, avoiding the creaky floorboards he had noted during his weeks of surveillance. The police found evidence that the killer had been inside the house before. A neighbor reported seeing a man loitering near the Johnsons' property a few nights before the murders. He had been wearing a hoodie, his face obscured, and had disappeared into the shadows when approached. At the time, the neighbor thought little of it, but after the murders, the memory haunted him. Forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed that the killer had used a hunting knife, which he had likely brought with him. The knife was sharp, and the wounds inflicted were deep and precise. The killer had struck with a force that suggested he was not only strong, but also experienced in using such a weapon. The police also discovered that the killer had taken something from the house, a small framed photograph of the Johnson family. It was a picture taken during a vacation, the family smiling and happy. The frame was found smashed in a nearby alley, the glass shattered and the photo missing. Why the killer took it and what he did with it remains a mystery. The confession of the killer years later provided some answers but raised even more questions. He claimed that he had no personal connection to the Johnson family. He had chosen them at random, driven by an inexplicable urge to kill. He described the act as something he had to do, a compulsion he could not resist. Psychologists who evaluated the killer described him as a classic example of a psychopath. He showed no remorse for his actions, no empathy for his victims. He spoke of the murders in a detached, almost clinical manner, as if he were recounting a mundane task rather than the brutal slaughter of an entire family. The impact of the murders on the community was profound. Parents became paranoid, installing security systems and keeping their children indoors. The local school hired additional security guards, and the town council held meetings to discuss ways to improve safety. But no amount of precaution could erase the fear that had taken root in the hearts of the townspeople. The Johnson family's extended relatives were devastated. John's brother, Tom, spoke at a memorial service, his voice breaking as he remembered his brother's kindness and Mary's warmth. "They didn't deserve this," he said. "No one deserves this." Emily and Michael's classmates were deeply affected as well. The school held counseling sessions to help the children cope with the loss of their friends. Teachers reported that some students had nightmares, while others became withdrawn, struggling to process the tragedy. The killer's arrest brought a measure of closure, but it did little to ease the pain. The Johnson family's home was eventually sold, and the new owners tried to create a fresh start. But the shadow of what had happened there lingered, a dark stain on the property that no amount of paint or renovation could erase. In the years that followed, the story of the Johnson family murders became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of life and the evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The town, once known for its peace and quiet, became synonymous with the tragedy, its name forever linked to the horror that had unfolded on that quiet, fateful night. And so, the memory of the Johnson family lives on, not just in the hearts of those who knew them, but in the collective consciousness of a community forever changed by their loss. The creak of a floorboard, the shadow in the corner, the silence of the night. These are the things that remind them of what happened and of the family that was taken too soon. So, what do you think? Is this story true or not? Let me know in the comments, and we will reveal the answer in our next video. Now let's talk about our previous story, the terrifying story of Japan's suicide forest. Is it true? Yes, it is. This isn't just a scary story or a myth, it's real, and it's been happening for a long time. Aokigahara, also called Japan's suicide forest, has a dark history. For centuries, people have linked it to death and sadness. Stories of ghosts and old legends about families leaving their elderly there have been passed down for generations. But in modern times, books and media have made it even more famous as a place where people go to end their lives. The Japanese government has tried to stop this by putting up signs with messages like, "Your life is precious," and sending patrols to help people in need. But still, many lives are lost there every year. Workers who search the forest for bodies say it's one of the hardest jobs, both physically and emotionally. The forest itself is eerie. Thick trees block out the sun, the ground is uneven, and it's so quiet that it feels like the world has stopped. Many who visit say they feel a heavy sadness, as if the forest itself is alive with the pain of those who've been there before. This story isn't just about a forest. It's about the struggles people face in life. Japan has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and Aokigahara is a symbol of that pain. But it's also a reminder that we need to talk more about mental health, support each other, and show kindness to those who are struggling. So yes, the story of Japan's suicide forest is true. It's a heartbreaking reality, but by sharing it, we can hopefully bring more awareness and help to those who need it most. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.